Hi everyone, I'm Airier, and today we look at Overly Sarcastic Productions' Trope Talk, The Last of Their Kind. I've seen a bunch of their Trope Talks have been out, and I haven't seen them yet, but I know what they do, so I want to see more of them. Also, I'm kind of curious what Red's take on The Last of Their Kind trope, like Superman, for example, is going to be doing. Also, would that also apply to... Yeah, it would be Kung Fu Panda as well. More importantly, I want to see what she's going to get into on this one. I have a master's in fiction. I know a lot about what's going to happen here, so I'm actually really curious to see what she's going to say on her side, because she's approaching this from the perspective of someone who has, admittedly, a ton of experience in a lot of fields I don't know about, and that's kind of why I'm really curious to see what she's going to say about this. So you guys know the deal. There's a link below to the original video. Hit it up. Let's get started.
When you're building a character for a story, the #1 rule of thumb you'll generally hear is that they need to be immediately identifiable in some way, which means something about them needs to be unique to them among...
And that's actually a really good bit of advice. I'm kind of surprised that's where they're starting with. But if Last of Their Kind makes them immediately identifiable, that's why. But specifically, the reason they do that is because boring characters are worse than hateable characters. If you hate someone, there's a good percentage of the audience who will stick around to see them get screwed. And if you're interesting, honestly, that's really hard to pull off because hateable characters are easier. You just have to do things people don't like. But if you're interesting, you're pulling things in that people empathize with, that they want to see get better. If they're suffering, for example, that's a way to empathize, which also sometimes is or is not interesting. It depends on how they do it. Boring, nothing to stand out, faceless, harem protagonist hair. That is horrible. And honestly, that's a really interesting way to bring that up initially.
Among the rest of the characters. Artists will talk about silhouettes or avoiding same face syndrome.
Yeah, the same face syndrome has absolutely and utterly, not even just failed, died a horrible death because most media intentionally choose characters who look generic. And I don't just mean anime. I don't just mean cartoons. I mean movies choose actors who have a general blandness sometimes, because the audience feels more comfortable with them. So it kind of works against the point she's making, and I personally hate that trend.
Writers will talk about speech patterns or accents to make it clear who's saying what in the dialogue, and of course...
Okay, dialogue, very important thing here. If you're writing an accent and it's for a show, a movie, an anime, or cartoon, a play, a video game, cool. It sounds interesting when it's verbal. So help me God, if you are writing accents into the narrative and it's a book you're reading, fuck you, man. And yes, the guy who wrote Huckleberry Finn, I can't remember your name right now, but I know exactly who you are. You did that. Fuck you. That was horrible. Also, I wasn't really a big fan of Tom Sawyer, so there's also that.
Of course, the bane of every character designer's existence is hearing, oh hey, that looks just like this other character from this much more well-known thing. It's an odd little fallacy that afflicts artists of all stripes. This idea that a work of art must justify its existence by being entirely unique, whether that's...
Also because everyone who says that is not doing that to be an asshole. Some, sure. Many, it's just where their mind goes. Yeah.
An individual character or an entire world or story concept. Total uniqueness is an understandable, unreachable star like for a creator to pursue, but it's not like how stories work. I mean...
Specifically, oh, she's actually going to, tropes are tools. That's actually not where I thought she was going. Whenever you bring up how stories are kind of going to sound similar, a lot of the time it's because there's only so many styles of narrative, depending on how you break them down. And I'm not going to list them just because I've heard anywhere from, there's 3 types of narrative, there's 7 to 15. And frankly, it's all semantics at some point. But in general, the phrase is, you got so many, they're going to be similar because so many story beats we kind of just like. That's not something you should be playing against, but knowing how to incorporate in unique ways that you would think of that someone else wouldn't. It's not that you're doing something similar to something else. I can't speak today, apparently. Someone else. There's the words I was looking for. It's that you're doing them in a way that hasn't been quite so thoroughly done before in your own unique style. You can't bring a new idea. Bring a different spin on it. Just twist it, change it. I guess in this phrase, you can even say bop it. You know where I'm going with this one. If you don't, do the same thing but different. I hate that phrase, but technically it's accurate.
And this is a series where we talk about tropes. Tropes are recurring patterns in storytelling that occur over and over again, frequently unintentionally on the part of the writer. Most people don't set out to build a story out of a bunch of pieces of other stories, and yet almost every...
Really? Braving the Blizzard, Big No, Secret Test character? Oh, because he wasn't aware, he said. Arch Nemesis Dad. Well, that one I think was intentional. Although I don't... but the actors at the time didn't know. Yeah, funny story. And if you don't know this one, there's actually videos talking about this from the original actors from Star Wars. Luke didn't know the twist until the screening. Mark Hamill found out "I am your father" was the line at the screening. What he heard from the actor in the suit was, and this was done in a French accent, "Luke, I killed your father." Also, I can't do a French accent, so that was probably insensitive and offensive. As opposed to my British accent, which requires me to remove my teeth. But otherwise, also the entire idea they're not doing something intentional. Maybe Star Wars is the best option, considering a lot of that was actually just stolen from old Japanese films. No, that was just the first movie. I'm not sure about the second.
Story can be broken down into elements that aren't unique to that story. And that is a completely fine and neutral thing. The pursuit of originality at all costs can actually pressure writers to shy away from legitimately good writing decisions in the name of surprising their audience with something they've never seen before.
Yeah. There's a huge trend right now of movies that exist to subvert expectations. I'm looking at you. Specific Star Wars trequel? What is that called anyways? Like the sequel trilogy? Trequel? Yeah. Second movie, I don't remember the name, had hyperspace ramming. People thought that was the annoying part. No, the annoying part was the entire middle of the movie existed to just make you surprised at what's going to happen next, and ultimately had no importance. That was the problem with that movie. Hyperspace ramming is like, it's science fantasy at the best of times, so it doesn't really matter. Oh, well, there's an entire established lore. Yeah, but also, it doesn't matter because it's basically fantasy. The science isn't hard. The establishment is all done off screen and also is bought by a completely different company that admittedly made something really cool looking. But if you get me onto the fact that so much of the movie didn't actually matter because it was all just a red herring, it didn't have literally... Sorry, I have opinions about this. I have opinions, and subverting expectations is the only thing. Is this is hitting closer to home than I thought because it's just so damn common.
Sometimes a part of storytelling happens a lot because it works.
Yeah.
Sometimes you've never seen something before because it doesn't.
If it's cliche,
While
it's usually because it
not healthy
works
to obsess
when
over
done well.
making your story totally distinct from every other story in the world, there is a legitimate benefit to making sure that elements of your own story don't repeat too often. Within the context of your own work, it can be very helpful to make sure that individual characters don't share too much in common with each other, or specific plot beats don't repeat too exactly. It's less important.
For example, I saw a recent video that had one style of humor throughout it. The entire internal joke of this video was, you think it's really dark, but then it's not. And then the next thing, you think it's really dark, and then it's not. And the next thing was, you think it's really dark, and then it's not. And it's not bad, and I don't mind the rule of three aspect, but also that was the entire punchline almost every time. It was kinda repetitive. I say kind of because they were admittedly well done bits of humor, but too much of the same punchline. And it's basically here. I don't want to name the specific one because I can't remember names at all, but let's pretend I actually would do that for a point.
Important that your character doesn't look like anybody else's character, and more important that all your characters don't look the same as each other. And this goes far beyond the visual design and cuts right to the core of characterization itself. The more distinct your characters are from each other, the more perspectives they'll have on the story they're in, the more different decisions they'll make at key points in the plot, the more things they can disagree on. And the more unique a character is in the context of the story, the more unique their...
Does the last one literally just say, I'm baby? Of course it does. Why do I feel like this is Inuyasha for some reason? I don't know.
Arc can be from anybody else's. A character that is unique among their friends and allies gives the writer a completely different angle on the story they're all sharing. And if you take this concept to its logical conclusion, attempting to create the most unique and individual character in an already diverse cast, you find a class of characters known as the last of their kind. The last...
Admittedly, yeah, the super unique is last of their kind. There is another thing that does that, and it's the much worse problem with this. It's not the last of the kind, it's the truly unique, the absurd character. And if you get that reference, you've seen Puffin's Forest multiple videos about the character Absurd, who is absurd and should never be made, and is actually in its own right a good trope. Everything they did was stupid. Everything that about them was done badly, and yet they kind of worked, if only to intentionally antagonize everyone around, because Puffin was basically trolling everyone and continued to do it through multiple seasons and sessions. Yeah.
Last of their kind are characters who, for one reason or another, are completely unique by virtue of the fact
You're the
that
number
everyone
one
else
guard.
like them is
It
gone.
was nice,
In the real
but a little
world, the last
insensitive.
member of a soon-to-be extinct species is called an endling, which is
Sorry, I just read that. That is horrible. Origins, culture, species, etc. are unique because they have only become the only survivor. Common uniqueness, appearance, language, strength, weakness, cultural practices, weapons, secret techniques, lost knowledge, profound isolation.
is just way too poignant to leave out of this conversation. An endling, the last of their kind, is the only one like them in the entire story, meaning everything that defines the people they come from becomes entirely unique to them. Culture, appearance, language, superpowers, homeland, special artifacts, bloodline techniques, they don't need to share them with anybody.
Is that a Naruto? Yeah, that is technically a Naruto reference directly to Sasuke. Last of his kind. Yeah, it's a good thing there were no other ones in the show. It's too bad Naruto never had a sequel that just focused on him and Hinata having slice of life after that. They just kind of ended it there and then it stopped and nothing ever came after it. Does anyone smoke toast?
Because there is nobody like them, right? Oh, come on, don't do this. This should be the easiest thing in the world to define.
Supergirl.
This trope is exactly
That's what you're
it says on the
referencing.
box. It's 5 words, a simple fact, the last of their kind. There is only one of them. That is the name of the trope, right?
I'm assuming the trope also has an addendum that is followed by discovering a second, usually female, which makes it even creepier that Supergirl was his cousin. But they probably did that intentionally because they didn't want to break up the Lois Lane Superman dynamic. Yeah. Although if you look at the entire species conservation process, he landed in, I think, what was it, the Midwest? Not Alabama. That would have very much changed. Oh, sorry, I just started picturing it. It's probably something online, but just there are levels of Sword Art Online you should not get to. And I don't want to get to that one. And I know what I said. And if you get the reference, yeah, that was a plot line.
Right? Well, as much as my love of dictionary definitions wish it weren't true,
Thinks
this trope
there's
almost
nobody else
never
like them.
actually adheres to the letter of the definition.
A character thinks there's nobody else of their kind like them, but they are not actually the only one. Sometimes I can still hear their voices. Don't mind us. Technically, that also, spoilers, would count as Doctor Who. Although the Master is his own thing, so him being alive was debatable for a bit. And then Last of Their Kind also turned out to be debatable. And I'm not even sure if they changed that back or not yet. Yeah.
At least not for long. A lot of characters are introduced as the last or only one of their kind, and then in a sequel or a later installment or a reboot, it'll turn out that actually there were a few more kicking around in hiding or otherwise obscure.
Definitely not doing piracy. Me too. Admittedly, this is probably more realistic to think everything's fucked, but then just people are all over the place. It's one of the reasons this is probably lampshaded by, okay, as long as we have a good reason, it's fine. If you have seen me ever talk about anything involving writing, you know me and thinking people put out good reasons is no, most people think of something in the most convoluted way possible rather than, what the fuck is going on? We just saw this happen. Random shit, got distracted, life happened. It's usually, well, we had some kind of metaphysical warning to do, and then they just go off on this big drivel that has no plot point. I'm not going to mention which story I'm thinking about, because I've already hurt myself enough with this entire episode as it stands.
Obscured from the plot, and our former last of their kind protagonist becomes one of a bunch. The main reason this is so common is very simple. If a main character is defined entirely by being the last of something, the primary conflict for their arc will most likely be centered around exploring that. Them being separated from their origins and isolated with nobody else like them anywhere can easily provide tension, tragedy, angst, mystery, and the incredibly obvious personal motivation of finding out more about themselves and their people. That can take a lot of different forms, but one of them is finding more people like them. Many last of their kinds were separated from their people at a very young age, and
the one thing I will point out here, there is a very distinct option here. A lot of the times, if they're doing it well, if someone fully explores the last of their kind option, they fully explore the loneliness, the search, all the things Red's going to now, and they reach a narrative conclusion here. An interesting way to bring in other characters is to introduce them at the end of the loneliness arc where they fully explored that. You don't want to put the character on the side. You don't want to give them that break because you need to keep it going. And you still think the character is interesting. You like where they're at and you want to just change the paradigm. I'm not even sure I said that word right. You give them this change because as soon as they find a way to accept themselves, it's being turned on their head. And that's an interesting change to switch it up for someone. I mean, usually I think it's nice to give them a little time to rest when they finally discover themselves and then change it on them so they have to readjust all again. That is an interesting way to do it. Doing it too soon, which is unfortunately how most people do it degrades it. Basically, what I'm saying is take your goddamn time. That is something that needs to be said with that level of emphasis, because most people think, okay, last of our kind. 5 minutes later, oh, there was another, but they don't know about it. And it's fine, but they're lonely. Because plot reasons say that the person who's actually aware that they're still alive doesn't actually need to tell them, and they think it's better for them to think they're alone. There are stupid tropes, and that's one of them.
Don't know anything about their origins when they start off, and the ones who become the last of their kind when they're older will probably be more determined to find other remnants of the world they knew. So while some characters who are the last of their kind will actually stay that way through to the end, the longer a story about these guys goes on, the more likely it is that it'll turn out that they're not actually the last, because one of the
Admittedly, depending on where you start, either in Dragon Ball or Dragon Ball Z, the last of the kind thing didn't matter that much. Especially since those that were still alive were all kind of, yeah. Goku also never really got into the loneliness thing because it's Goku. Yeah. Honestly, if Vegeta was the main character, it would have been very different. Also, not made for kids at that point.
Juiciest ways to explore a character's mysterious origin is to introduce more characters who share that origin. This is a huge problem in long-form comics, which are already notorious for continuity snarls. For instance, Superman debuted in 1938 with the origin story that he was the last son of Krypton, the sole survivor of a total planetary apocalypse saved by his scientist parents Moses style in an intergalactic basket in the bulrushes. He was the only Kryptonian on Earth, and his power set, even though it drifted and changed over the years, came from his unique alien physiology.
Drifted. That is a very generous way to say it. Initially, he couldn't fly, and he was only faster than a train, which admittedly was like, what, 30 miles an hour? 40? At this time, I don't actually know how fast locomotives were, but it wasn't close to what a car can do now, because steam engines and all that. But yeah, drifted is nice, considering in the next generation of the Golden Age of Superman, he dragged a chain of planets behind him willy-nilly, because also he kept them intact because telekinesis could just do everything. It was literally all the power. There are gods depicted in Marvel now that have less power than Golden Age Superman was shown to have in multiple scenes. Also high-speed knitting, because sure, why not? That was a specific separate power from speed.
And how it was affected by Earth's gravity and yellow sun. And as far as I can tell from my cursory research on the subject, Superman was the only surviving Kryptonian for 20 real years until 1958, when the bottle city of Kandor was introduced. A Kryptonian city that was shrunken and abducted en masse by Brainiac before the planet exploded. Its permanent shrunken state handily prevented it from doing much to undercut Superman's last son of Krypton thing, since it's not like a city's worth of Supermen popped out of the woodwork to make things complicated on Earth. But 1 year later, Supergirl was introduced, Superman's cousin, who also survived the planet going boom, and then in 1961 we started getting Kryptonian bad guys like General Zod. At this point, Superman is only the last—
Really? It took that long for Zod to come in? Huh. Actually, I'm a little surprised about that.
Last son of Krypton because it makes for a killer subtitle. It hasn't been factually true in decades. Something similar happened in Dragon Ball, where for the first several arcs of the manga, it was never indicated that Goku was the last of anything. He was just weird, a super strong kid with a monkey.
Admittedly, he also is just weird. That never changed.
Detail. In a world with Triclopses, ageless psychic toddlers, shape-shifting pigmen, and talking animals, a weird kid with a tail didn't really raise any eyebrows until the Saiyan saga hit, and it turned out that Goku was an alien, one of only 4 survivors of the destruction of their home planet, soon to be 2 survivors, followed by a brief stint as the last remaining Saiyan when Vegeta winds up dead for a few extra long minutes during the final battle.
Also, technically, he also wasn't alive during a good part of it, so there was a good bit where Vegeta was the only known survivor as well. Huh. That
with
did kind of
Frieza.
change a lot.
Non-canon and semi-canon movies like piling on more surviving Saiyans because it's an easy formula for a villain of the week, and as long as they die at the end, it doesn't really do much to the Earth-based status quo. So,
yeah.
what are we even talking about here? We're trying to define
a loose
trope,
trope.
and we've just cut ourselves off at the knees by saying the only definition that makes sense doesn't even apply to most of the iconic examples. What is
Admittedly, it seems like the last of their kind needs so many quotation marks like she's adding that they think they're last of the kind. The think is unfortunately probably useful at this point because there's just three too many parentheses.
is the point of a character who's the last of their kind if it turns out they're not even the last of their kind? How does that define the character in any meaningful way? They're just a character at that point. Well, we can sort of finagle this. A character who is the last or only one of their kind only needs to believe this about themselves for a solid chunk of the story for this trope to manifest in the plot. A character who thinks they're the last or has been told they're the last and refuses to believe it has access to exactly the same space of characterization and subplots as a character who really is the last of their kind. They're isolated, alone. They may hold themselves responsible for single-handedly carrying.
Oh, Echidna made and she found it, yeah. Oh, because he was Knuckles the Echidna. I actually forgot that for a second. So basically it sounds like Red is saying it's not so much that they have to be accurate to the trope, but it's the mental headspace of the character that is more indicative of it, which is actually a really interesting way of looking at it, not how I considered it. I just considered it an easily violated trope that people just went away from because story convenience and actually good plot points sometimes, and then just being lazy on others. But if it's more about the mental headspace, it's a lot easier to get into. And it wouldn't rely on the story actually being accurate, but more the character believing it. So it would rely on people to be good writers and not fuck up their own characters. 50-50 odds.
On the legacy of their people, or they may know absolutely nothing about their people or even themselves. They might not have any
finding out
context
he's
for
not
who they
alone, and
are
then
or
probably
where they
wishing he
came
was.
from, and uncovering that might be their primary motivation. Characters who are really the last of their kind can do this readily, but characters who only think or wonder if they're the last of their kind can be racked with just as much uncertainty and angst, maybe more, because they don't know for sure. Sometimes these characters spend the bulk of their personal arcs searching for others like them, or trying to uncover their past, and in these contexts it makes sense that as part of their happy ending they'd run into more of their people and get the answers they've been seeking all along. By definition, this means they aren't really the last of their kind, but that doesn't really matter because the entire point of the story still hinges on that question. Are they really the last? And if not, will they be able to find the others? One series that builds this up pretty organically is the Kung Fu Panda trilogy. In the first movie, Po is the only panda we see, but this is never really addressed as anything too noteworthy. His dad is a goose and he's a bit of a fish out of water, but mostly he's just characterized as a Kung Fu fanboy in a world of actual badasses. Most of the Furious Five are also the only animals of their specific species that we see in the movie. Tigress is the only tiger, Mantis is the only bug, Viper is the only snake, etc. In fact, the only animals that we really see more than one of are basically the background extras, pig and bunny villagers and rhino prison guards. The fact that Po is the only panda doesn't stand out as weird. Then the sequel dives really heavily into this question of where Po came from, how he got adopted by a goose, and where his biological parents factored into all this. The story eventually unpacks that the reason Po is the only panda we've ever seen is that the villain of Kung Fu Panda 2 did a full-on panda genocide to try and avert a prophecy of doom, and Po only survived because...
Okay, so I heard he was the last of his kind. I didn't know why, and having not watched the first one, I didn't realize it was unusual to just make that as the only one visible. I also wasn't aware we had Bird Hitler going on, so that is a thing I was not aware of. That movie went a lot harder than I expected. Note to self, apparently I should watch the trilogy of Kung Fu Panda movies. Did not know there was 3.
Because his mother sacrificed herself to save him. The emotional arc of Kung Fu Panda 2 is centered on Po unpacking his repressed memories and coming to terms with who he is, which he does in the burned-out remains of what was once his home. In the first movie, Po is just the only panda. In the sequel, Po is the last panda. Until the very last scene of the movie when we get a glimpse of a hidden panda village and Po's father, which becomes the plot of Kung Fu Panda 3, confirming once and for all that Po is not the last panda. But the fact that he's got surviving family and a community by the end of 3 doesn't invalidate his last of his kind revelation in 2. In fact, it kind of does this interesting thing where there are a few points in Kung Fu Panda 3 where there are things that come naturally to the pandas of the hidden village that Po hears about and is like, oh, that makes perfect sense and it never occurred to me because I wasn't raised in a community of people that were like me. There's something kind of profound about the fact that Po was raised entirely separate from anybody else.
I also want to point out what they're doing on the screen. It's actually something pandas do in real life, so I love that they include that. Why haven't I heard about these movies? I heard about the first two. I didn't know there was a third. Why did no one ever tell me this? Probably because it's been out for a while and I just missed it because I'm an idiot. Stop making up good exact reasons that probably are accurate.
Like him, and there's this strong arc in the first movie especially that Poe kind of always feels like he's doing something wrong, and if you're in the audience and you're like neurodivergent or in other ways part of a community of people who mostly don't really think like you can sort of end up feeling like, oh, there's something to his experience of being the last / only one of people like him in this supportive community, at least after the first movie, of people who do like and care about him but don't really know what his like needs are and what things he would naturally be good at. Like in the first movie, Master Shifu has to do a lot of work to figure out how to properly train Poe because Poe is not like anybody else he's ever taught. And in the first movie, it's because Poe is a big goofy panda kung fu fanboy who hasn't actually been training from like day one. But in the second movie, it kind of becomes clear that like, oh, Poe is actually separated from his environment because he is different from everybody around him. And then in the third movie, we get a glimpse of people like him who like rolling around and eating food and appreciate the fact that he's big and squishy. So there is a very interesting microcosm of the arc a character who is the last of their kind can go through just in this trilogy of movies, with Poe experiencing alienation and isolation, being the only one of his kind but not really recognizing that, and then
again, the irony of the fact that I pointed out Kung Fu Panda because I just heard the trope. Again, this is what happens when you wiki walk late at night and you barely remember what you did, and apparently I read this at some point and I just missed the rest. All of this, yeah, after this, I need to go watch these movies. They're probably not hard to find. I could probably find them on Netflix. I don't have Netflix anymore. Shit. Okay, that might be harder to find than I thought.
Poe experiencing the delayed tragedy of understanding why and how he became separated from his people, and then Poe experiencing this strange feeling of understanding and belonging for the first time in his life when
And admittedly, it might actually work out better this way. Now that I'm just thinking about it, the entire last of their kind trope does enhance finding the family later on. Just because if you go from, oh, I'm just weird to I have family, it's fine. That you do that. But going from I'm just weird to, oh, shit, I'm not just weird. I'm literally alone, which de-emphasizes just the weirdness aspect and more the, oh, shit, there's actually a problem to that. It's less from taking step 1 to step 2 and more from step 1 to step -1 to step 2. So there's a much bigger increase in the amount of emotional impact on this. It's not just, this is cool. It's, oh my God, this is amazing. It's that small change, and it's a good way to do it. So in this case, and considering it was in the same movie that they revealed that there were pandas, it was definitely intended that way to make the emotional impact of what came after it more important, as opposed to just tacking it on in the next movie and making it feel shoehorned. Huh. That's kind of brilliant. This is a Disney movie, isn't it? Is Kung Fu Panda Pixar or DreamWorks? I don't actually know.
he rejoins his family at the end of 3, without losing his found family that he gained over the last 2 movies, who do understand him in a different way that the people of his home village, who don't do martial arts, can't really understand. None of that was scripted. Apparently, I just had a lot of thoughts about Kung Fu Panda. Okay, back on script.
Wait, that wasn't scripted? Honestly, I actually figured that was her script. Wow, first time I've seen her just look ashamed, or not ashamed, abashed. Cute.
One of the most egregious examples of this kind of writing shenaniganery is probably The Last Unicorn. The protagonist and title character of the story starts off by hearing a pair of hunters saying that there are no other unicorns left, followed by a gorgeous musical number about how the last unicorn is beautiful and alone at the end of everything. And the first thing the unicorn does when the movie really gets going is say, well, that's not right. There's absolutely no way I'm the last unicorn. And sets out into the world to find out what happened to the others, and she turns out to be 100% correct. And at the end of the story, all the other unicorns are released from their imprisonment in the ocean and sent back out into the world.
So they gave the dramatic irony, but you don't realize it's dramatic irony until later on. And they're not actually, but why are they in prison under the sea when they drown? It's probably magic. It's probably magic, yeah.
No way, shape, or form is she the last unicorn. She at no point believes she is the last unicorn. She doesn't even spend some of the movie as a unicorn. But it makes a great title and a banging musical number, and it would have been much less poignant to call it The Last Unicorn in This Zip Code. The temporarily isolated unicorn. This town ain't big enough for 2 unicorns. But there's a good reason this keeps happening. From a character
2 horns are better than 1. But I guess I'd be too horny. Hey, I know that was horrible, but I'm taking that one, damn it. I've held off on so many horrible puns this entire time. Give me the... We're only halfway through. Okay, maybe I gave in to the horrible punniness a little too soon. I might have made a mistake. There'll be more.
Character arc standpoint, there is no difference between a character who is a true endling and a character who only thinks they are. They have the same internal struggles, the same questions of identity. It's just a matter of what they find at the end of that part of their journey. There's another reason that characters who are the last of their kind frequently don't stay that way for long. If a character's primary strength in the narrative is how unique they are and how they have abilities that nobody else does, one of the simplest ways to provide an absolute gut drop of an antagonist is to pit them against somebody who has those exact same abilities. Maybe somebody who has those abilities and training and how to actually use them to their full potential. When a character has been defined by being completely unlike anyone else in the story, one of the scariest things they can be faced with is a level playing field. And
admittedly, Goku wasn't unlike anyone else. He kind of was like everyone else, just he was doing it better. I mean, all of his attacks he got from other people. Kamehameha. Literally, it's Roshi's attack. He's just doing it faster. The only thing unique was the part he didn't use, which was, turning into a giant monkey. And admittedly, considering some of the other shit going on, that did really not stand out. Fucking rabbit on the moon, man. Dear God. But, yeah. Just remember when Raditz was a scary villain? Yeah, he doesn't either.
And it's always a fun oh shit moment when a character who's had an absolute superlative advantage in some specific ability, like just being better than all their allies at raw strength or weapons training or magic talent, turns out to be average at best by the standards of their people and gets absolutely stomped at their one thing by someone who's legitimately impressive by the standards of the greater community. And this can be impactful even if the surprise villainous other character doesn't herald a dramatic expansion of the cast with just kidding, not the last after all. Sometimes it's more impactful if it's just the two of them and one of the only two survivors is evil. This applies even in stories where there wasn't ever a larger community that got whittled down. Like in Star Trek The Next Generation, Data is introduced as an entirely unique type of android.
His brother, yeah.
That quietly puts him through profound alienation as nobody else in the universe works quite like he does. Then it turns out he has a brother, Lore, an identical android and the only other thing in the universe like him, ignoring the various other Soong-type androids that eventually get shaken out of the canon. But Lore is evil, or...
Wait, out of the canon? Oh. I heard there was others. I didn't realize there was probably a retcon because they restarted it with the movies. That's why. Yeah.
At least racked with profound daddy issues, and what makes this difficult is that Lore is the only other person in the universe that understands Data, and he uses this understanding to manipulate him. It's hard when your only choices are total isolation or enable a guy who keeps murdering people. This appears to be a weirdly common thing in sci-fi because they did the exact same thing in Doctor Who. Doctor Who back in the day introduced the Time Lords as the species of alien that the Doctor was one of. They were...
Admittedly, the reasoning here is probably different from Star Trek. Star Trek, it's because it's a good plot point. Doctor Who, because it's a good plot point. I just literally talked out of my own point. Excuse me. I guess that goes on me for trying to say something. No. It's exactly the same plot point for the exact same reason, because it is effective. Other than everyone then coming back. Although admittedly, I don't want to say it, but maybe the Master did nothing wrong because they were kind of horrible.
Were super advanced masters of time that the Doctor didn't really get along with, having stolen his time machine and ran away from all their rules and regulations. One recurring renegade Time Lord was the villainous The Master, a flamboyant schemer that seems to have been one of the most fun things about classic Doctor Who. I haven't watched as much of it as I probably could have because I got into it when Doctor Who came back with the new series, starting...
Hey, yeah, I started at the same time. Way to go, Red. Nice. Eccleston really got shafted on that one. Yeah, they didn't actually... or I was going to say they didn't ask him if he wanted to go for another season. They just assumed he didn't, and he found out that he was replaced by Tennant. Yeah. That was actually how that went down. Kind of dickish.
With the Ninth Doctor, and after a little bit of foreshadowing and teasing and hints of some kind of great war, he explained that he was the last Time Lord, and it became clear that something terrible had happened off screen. A time war, seemingly waged outside of normal space-time in a manner so cataclysmic that it destroyed the Time Lords and the Daleks utterly, which is...
And he felt horrible guilt for the fact that he was responsible for killing them all. And admittedly, it was great how they did a sort of retcon with the Day of the Doctor. And that entire 50th anniversary special, and it turned out he didn't kill them all. He just saved them to the best of his ability, because it was like almost a decade plus of writing showing that he could redeem himself. And nothing else ever came after that to make that feel less impactful.
Is convenient because when it comes to tragic backstories, time travelers kind of have an automatic nuh-uh if they want to just time travel back to before everything exploded for a little pre-trauma vacation time.
Technically they did, over and over and over until it didn't.
Unmade the Time Lords in such a profound way.
Oh, speaking of, this is the episode I just referenced, is what she's showing right now. Good taste, Red.
That there didn't seem to be any going back until
movie.
they did go back in a later season after I stopped watching. Continuity. Anyway, this resulted in a deeply traumatized Doctor as the only survivor of the Time Lord side, the very last of his people. Except, just kidding, of course the Master is also there. And this is played for all the drama you could want, including, eventually, the Master actively choosing not to use his get-out-of-death-free card so he can die in the Doctor's arms just to spite his constant attempts to make him stop murdering quite so much. Obviously, that didn't last either. The Master is too popular to let die, but at this point that's not even a blip on the radar. For some stories, continuity is the only true enemy. This specific flavor of antagonist, another survivor of our hero's nearly extinct group, but so evil that they really test our hero's patience and our moral code, can also play into a different and profound character arc. Intrinsic in this kind of story, where a
possible conflict for the not quite last of their kind. Which family to choose? I mean, usually the one you've been with, because these guys apparently are evil. Oh, it's just because the picture she's drawn, not that specific character type.
Separated from their people of origin, so find their place in the world, is a very fundamental question. Are their people the place they come from, or are they the people who love them now? Both. A character who is the last of their kind usually doesn't go through the story alone. In order to highlight their unique traits, they'll contrast with other main characters who are very different from them. In this contrast, there is frequently conflict, misunderstandings or miscommunications, things that come naturally to the others that don't click with the loner, or vice.
Earlier in this video, Red mentioned unintentional tropes, and she's basically highlighting one right now. The difference between found family and birth family. Which, again, it's not what she's aiming for, but also exactly what she's outlining as a found trope. An unintentional trope. I just kind of find it funny that she mentioned that, and then she's pointing it out unintentionally at her own time. It's accurate, and really what makes this kind of fascinating is when that has happened. Also, that is something that is viable, because I said 3 times why not, there is evidence, I keep saying the word is, that when it comes to genetics versus nature, nurture, what they're talking about here is found family versus biological, which one do you belong to? That's actually very similar in the debate between how these forms are affecting a person as they grow. What is more important, your genes or your family? The answer is, like I said, both, because both can absolutely fuck you up. But genes are also, discovered recently, reactive to your living situation. So nurture does actually change nature. How you live changes how your body actually works at a genetic level, which is kind of fascinating because they do play into each other directly. It's probably a human thing to do that, but if there are not species that have way more effect based on that, I would be very surprised, just because biology's weird as fuck, man.
Vice versa, part of what likely drives them to seek others like themselves is that feeling of alienation that comes with being surrounded by people who like them, but on some level will never quite understand them. But if they find people who are like them and can understand them, and despite those similarities they then don't get along, it can raise some uncomfortable questions about belonging and being understood, and whether this character is doomed to be, on some level, alone forever. This opens up a very interesting space of character conflict, where the character who formerly believed they were the last of their kind might need to decide whether they're willing to compromise their principles in order to stop being the last of their kind and be with people who are like them, or if they can't accept their people at all and instead need to choose to remain a stranger in a strange land, separate from the people they have the most in common with, often people they've been searching for the entire series, but together with the people they've slowly grown closer to, whose principles they actually agree with. A real found family versus biological family kind of conflict. And this is a conflict that really can't fully play out unless the last of their kind is presented with the option of reuniting with their people, which basically means they can't actually stay as the last of their kind for the whole run of the plot. You can't do this specific brand of angst with a character who's truly the last of their kind. They need both options in order to fully explore where they stand. But while these are very interesting angles to explore, not every character who's the last of their kind goes through these arcs. Some of them are well and truly isolated for the entire run of their story. Sometimes last really does mean last. And these characters really let the tragedy of this trope show. Because for all I've said that the character arcs start the same whether or not the character is truly the
The
last of
ending
their
is very
kind. They
different.
diverge very strongly when the character receives confirmation that there aren't any others. Some characters know this for a fact from the very beginning and have time to grieve or come to terms with it, but other characters learn over the course of the story that there isn't anyone like them out there. When they receive absolute proof that they're alone in the universe,
Oh, yeah, Owl House when he got... I remember this episode. King thought he found family. It was the hunters who killed his family instead, who were literally wearing masks of the things they killed. Yeah, that was dark as F, man. Disney Kids Show. Disney Kids shows have changed a lot. Honestly, for the better.
it changes their place
It's like the
in it.
reverse of
And more
Cartoon Network
importantly,
shows.
this can either rip away their core motivation, or it can replace it with something new. Whatever happens, it can't leave them unchanged,
You're
because
totally
it represents a profound loss of hope. This character is no longer searching for their people because they know unquestioningly that that search is pointless. The world may be big and full of potential and wonderful, interesting people, but none of those people are the people they want to find.
I would put in the caveat there that the bigger the world you use, the more likely the author, if they go long enough, will decide to change that trope, because if you completely explore an aspect, like I mentioned earlier, you don't want to leave a character behind. If a story's finished, if the run's done, if there's no continuance, things can stay as they are. But if you're trying to keep going, a serialization, or in terms of movies or games, also serialization, just consecutive bits of lore and information, or you just want to keep using a character for some reason, like it doesn't initially start as something, but then it keeps going well beyond its initial point, changing it probably becomes more important. Or temporarily, what they did with Doctor Who, and take it from someone who wasn't the last of their kind to making them the last of their kind. It's not the starting point, but it becomes the point. And then they changed it a few times, so he may or may not be again. I haven't kept up with the new stuff because they took it off Netflix. I haven't been able to watch it since. And yes, I realized that was actually quite a number of years ago. Don't tell me how many years, because it just hurts to hear it.
A character who is the last has a lot of decisions to make. They represent the totality of their people. If there's some kind of responsibility those people shared, it's now totally on them to keep it going. And if there's some principle they valued, the endling needs to decide how to uphold it. And I think I've been commendably patient in waiting this long to bring up Avatar: The Last Airbender. Look, I gotta! It's central to the entire plot. It's literally in the name. I promise I've watched more
I'm actually judging myself for not initially coming to this as an example. But it's probably because every time I watched Avatar on TV when I was growing up, it was always the goddamn cave episode. And if you know the one, it is one of the absolute worst episodes in the entire show. Not just bad, but actively horrible. If you cut that in one other episode that I never saw out, it would be fine. But for some reason, I just lucked into that episode every damn time. It was 3 times. But the fact that it happened 3 times is just, no. Why would they even bother showing that when it was just bad? I thought this show was horrible because that was my only exposure to it. 4 years. Still kind of regret that. Yeah.
shows than just this one. Now, of course, Avatar: The Last Airbender is exactly what it says on the box. Aang, the Avatar, is the last of the air nomads. A fact he categorically does not believe for the first couple episodes. Sure, he got frozen in an iceberg for a little while, but when he ran away, there were tons of air nomads, and the threat of war was just a distant fire on the horizon. Nothing more than a reason for the air nomad elders to rip away Aang's childhood as quickly as possible to get the Avatar ready for war. Everyone keeps telling him that nobody's seen an airbender in a full 100 years, but that doesn't prove anything. There could be tons of explanations. Maybe they're all just hiding. Aang is 12 years old, and from his perspective, he's only been gone a few days. Even if intellectually he might know that something is probably wrong, emotionally, he cannot possibly have processed that at this point. So they kick off the 3rd episode of the show with Aang excitedly telling Katara he can't wait to show her his home, the Southern Air Temple. Katara is more cautious about the whole thing, in large part because Aang is so enthusiastic and happy. It doesn't really seem to have occurred to him that things could have actually gotten bad. So she keeps trying to prepare him for the worst, but he keeps justifying why there's definitely nothing to worry about. There's no way the firebenders could have even reached the temple. Sure, he's
just rubbing it in how much I missed by not seeing the show earlier. Just rub that one in, Red. I've had time to change this. I need to watch the show. There's one of many shows I need to watch, and I just haven't yet. Yeah, just kicking myself.
heard that the Fire Nation has killed
I've seen
a lot
more of
people, but it's
Korra
not
than this
really
first show.
real to him yet. Aang has a
Haven't finished
brief
that one
flash
either.
of ennui when
Different
they
reason.
reach the Air Temple, and he notices how there's nobody around, no people, no animals, etc., etc. But Sokka quickly distracts him, and his sunny attitude bounces back immediately. But there's this feeling of dread that hangs over the episode, especially on a rewatch. The Air Temple is perfectly preserved, it's just deserted and lifeless compared to Aang's vibrant flashbacks. It doesn't look particularly burned or scarred or damaged, and any signs of war are pretty easily concealed, but it's completely empty. Katara and Sokka learn very early that firebenders made it up there after all, and if the airbenders were in any fit state after that, they probably would have cleaned up a little bit. Aang is happy and enthusiastic and laughing, and Sokka and Katara are trying to spare him from the pain of revelation that they know is coming. They can't protect him from the horror. The horror has already happened. Every bit of comic relief and whimsy just feels like setup for the moment it all comes crashing down, and when that inevitably happens, Aang is so overwhelmed with horror and grief that he immediately loses himself to the Avatar state. Sokka and Katara manage to bring him back out of it, and by the end of the episode he's cheerful and laughing again, but it's clearly a little bit of an act this time, and he remains consistently very protective of the last remnants of air nomad culture, and very, very upset when they're threatened, both by antagonists like the bad guys that kidnap Appa, and by other good guys like the inventors with flying machines that set up shop in the abandoned Northern Air Temple. That one's extra cruel because it briefly gives Aang false hope that some airbenders did survive, and Aang's not too happy seeing his sacred temple stuffed full of machinery.
I was unaware of that. I mean, admittedly, I was unaware of everything she just said for the reasons I mentioned before, which still kind of fucking hurt, but this entire video is convincing me I need to watch the Kung Fu Panda movies because there's more than two. And I think there's another one coming out. And apparently Avatar The Last Airbender, which I haven't still. This is on me. I need to fix that.
And in the final conflict of the show, Aang struggles to find a way to defeat Fire Lord Ozai while
Oddly
upholding
enough, I know
the
this one
central
through
air
memes.
nomad tenet
I know
of
the way it ends
pacifism,
through
a
memes.
decision he gets flack for from every other main character, who would be immediately down to kill the dude that commands and represents the regime burning their homes and killing their loved ones. But it's a decision.
I mean, I know how he actually did at the end, and there were no problems set up by that. Also, admittedly, the way he did it is kind of fucking terrifying.
That carries a lot of meaning when it comes from Aang. Previous air nomad avatars could sacrifice their personal spiritual well-being to maintain balance in the world because there were other air nomads who could keep their practices alive. In Search of the Avatar, Sozin slaughtered the air nomads in a conflict so quick and casual it's relegated to one line in his autobiography. The air nomads were gentle pacifists who practiced spiritual cultivation and valued joy, and who everyone indicates were pretty easy to kill. And if the Fire Nation's war had succeeded in taking all of those things away from Aang, they would have entirely succeeded in wiping out the air nomads in every way that mattered. Aang, the last airbender, had to find a way to defeat Ozai that didn't sacrifice the last remnants of the people and the culture he solely represented.
Also, this is just something I've been wondering about. Why are they called air nomads if they seem to have very dedicated, solid locations that didn't move? This is probably something that was answered in the show, but it just sounds weird every time I hear it.
So instead of just killing Ozai with a big anime attack and tacitly proving that the Fire Nation's might makes right motto was objectively correct, which would incidentally also imply that the other airbenders died because they were too wimpy to fight back, not because pacifism is a strength all on its own and them getting killed was a bad thing that happened to them, not a thing that they were at fault for, Aang opens himself up in horrible vulnerability that could absolutely unmake him if his spirit falters, and in an act of pacifism that could have easily killed him, he utterly strips away Ozai's power without abandoning the principles of the people that Ozai and his ancestors derided as weak. Aang is
Admittedly, the way he did it is way more terrifying than killing the guy. That probably would have been nicer.
the Avatar, and he is also the last airbender. And in the ultimate moral victory of the show, he proves that he can be both. So, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I have some homework ahead of me. I need to go check out Kung Fu Panda movies, plural, because there's more than I thought, and I need to get to them because they're way, way better than I thought they were. And I really need to get on watching Avatar: The Last Airbender. I've known I should have for a while. This is on me. Unlike Kung Fu Panda, where I had no idea, Avatar I knew was good. I just can't get over the fact that the ones I saw were... It was that fucking cave episode. I saw that every... Oh, it was also the one with, like... Was the cave episode also the one with, like, the two friends? It was like, oh, I know them, but then he's just lying about it. I don't even know at this point. The memory of how bad that episode was kept me from ever watching the show. I need to fix that. This is on me. Basically, what I'm saying is, This video, it just, I like how Red is digging into these. I like that I know enough about this to get where she's coming from. And I don't really disagree with how she's approaching it. I just wish she had phrased it more that the big important aspect to the trope was that it's about the mentality more than the reality. Although the reality does take in the two different directions she showed really importantly. The depression and the horror and the tragedy of actually being alone versus all of the other openings to different plot lines that come from not being alone. Admittedly, though, I think most people don't do it for plotline options and more because we're running out of ideas. Let's throw something at the wall and try and jump this shark before anyone notices. I have a very low opinion of some choices people have made in popular media. Probably not the ones most people are thinking. Again, referencing a specific sequel trilogy Star Wars episode where everyone hated certain aspects and I hated that they just kept trying to throw curveballs at you because, well, it surprised the audience. That makes a good movie. Yeah, once. And then it's useless and no one watches it ever again. Because it's useless. Sorry. Surprise media I don't like it. It's not good. Or more specifically, it's not usually handled well, so it's not good by incompetence as opposed to doing it well is fun. The I Am Your Father was a great bit of surprise, and everyone learned the wrong lesson from that one. Yeah. As you can see, I have opinions. More importantly, though, you guys know the deal. Link below, video, hit it up. This was awesome, but make sure to go check this video. If you've already seen it, do it again. Let it play in the background or watch it because there's probably things I missed because it's me, and let me know if I did. Otherwise, let me know when the next video comes out because I like just checking out things as they come out, like the Leaning Tower of Pisa video, because I geek out over architecture massively, so I was really having fun with that one. Again, links below the original video. Hit it up. I'll see you guys in the next one. Adios.